Now, okay, so then what's the problem? Right? It looks like the audio is back up, guys. Give me a second. Let me start up the stream. Quick access thumbnail. This is number 8. Oh. So let's start with short. No, gaming will be the anime. We'll put shorts afterwards. Shorts. Alright. Then news. Okay, and news, right? Oh wow. Check out their comedy. Shorts and news, right? That's number 8. Okay. So we couldn't come on the other day because we had a power outage, and then Digicel's internet was having some fiber optic problem, guys. So that's why we couldn't come on. So. No. Get this down here. Save it. So you guys are not just sitting here looking at this, looking at my face for no reason. Where is this? There I go. Hang tight, everybody. Says now that I am live. Good. Scroll all the way up. Oh, this is actually, I should put gaming. Not than just, no, it's all overall entertainment because I'll play some games, but. Close this. Let's see what we have here. I'm gonna have to need it. Hey Reg, what up? Oh, that's right. Because of when the power went out, it knocked out the damn computer. So I have to redo everything again. Alright. Lumpy. Yo, what's good, Trapwoods? It's been a while. Yeah, I've been grinding the Valkyries hardcore, man. Just been doing what I can. I've effectively finished Tears of the Kingdom. I'm just doing all these side stories and stuff like that. I was trying to come on yesterday, but power issues in Spanish Town, and then this morning there was an issue with Digicel. I was trying to get on earlier. Nightwolf, what's up? See, a lot of you guys are up during the daytime, so like when I stream late at night, it's like it's virtually pointless actually, because you guys are sleeping and whatnot. I need to start streaming like the time I want to come on more around is like 3. So I like I do a 3 to 5 or 3 to 6. in the middle of the day. And then definitely on Saturdays. All right, here I am. Kisan, what's up? You guys make sure you leave a like if you can. Let me get back to this.
Great. By the way, when you say dismissed, Rob just pulled this up. As of March 3rd, the charges against Andrew Tate have not been dismissed. In December 2024, Romanian court identified procedural errors in the case leading to dismissal. However, investigations into allegations of human trafficking, rape, and forming an organized crime group are ongoing.
Correct.
Is it still that? Is that still
correct? So let me clarify. Correct. Absolutely. December 2024, my case was dismissed. The Romanian court identified procedural errors in the case leading to a dismissal. That sounds like, procedural errors, no big deal. What if procedural errors are false translations? What if procedural errors are illegal wiretaps? What if procedural errors are not respecting my client attorney privilege? What if they spied on me and almost talked to my lawyer? What if they broke every single law in the Romanian constitution, which is what they did? Then they returned it to the prosecutor and said, do it all again. So here it says, it's still ongoing. Yeah, it was dismissed because the whole case is garbage, just as I described. They sent it back to the prosecutor saying, we'll keep him locked up, we'll keep him here, here's 2 more years, try again. Is that justice?
Nope.
I'm asking a genuine question. Maybe I'm jaded. Maybe I'm wrong because I'm living in the middle of it. As professional men, do you see that as justice? I beat my case. They lied and cheated the whole way through. They sent it back. And then they get to say, it's still ongoing because the case is open because we're going to do it again. Is that allowed?
So Romanians expecting you to be back by March 23rd.
Correct.
That's what because of this.
No.
And did they allow you to leave purely for, what's the reason why they allow you to come to the States?
They allowed me to come to the States because in December my case was dismissed. In 99.9% of Romanian cases, that means the end of bail conditions. With me, they kept the bail conditions. They kept them for December. They kept them for January. They tried to keep them for February. And my lawyers made submissions to court. And we went in front of a judge. And we complained that this is unfair. And a judge said, okay, let him fly as long as he comes back once a month. And I said, I will respect the Romanian judicial system because I'm not running from anything. And I'm going to go back. Guys, anyone who's concerned about me running doesn't understand me. We got a direct order from the commander-in-chief. It was 3 words long. And it was fight, fight, fight. I'm not going anywhere. You can go back to Romania. They may arrest me. They could be back in jail. I don't know what. But I'm going to go back. I'm not running from any of this. I've never run from any of this. My bail conditions were lifted. I've been in Romania for a very long time. I felt like a holiday. I thought Ron was a good governor. I chose Florida. Turns out it's communist like the rest. But I'm here for a while. It's not. There's no huge conspiracy. There's no Trump pressure. There's none of these things. 3 years I gave them. 3 years, and eventually they said, okay, you can go to your home country. They should have let me come here a long time ago. I should have been able to come here the whole time. The whole process, I should have been able to come here. I've never been convicted. Why wasn't I free to travel the whole last 3 years? That's the actual question Ron should be asking. Ron should stand up there, or anyone with a brain should stand up and say, okay, well, you've never been convicted. And the case keeps getting thrown out for lack of evidence, or falsified evidence, and illegal evidence. Why couldn't you travel all this time? Why was he even stuck in Romania? Why did they even take my cars? Let's be professionals and ask pertinent questions here. Why did they steal my money? Why did they put me in jail? Why did they take all my cars? Why did they take my house? Why did they stop me seeing 2 of my children? Why couldn't I see my mother when she had a heart attack? Why couldn't I go to my grandmother's funeral? Why was my image slandered? Why was I locked in my house for 1.5 years and I couldn't even leave the living room? Why was I there if there was not even enough evidence to ever go to trial ever? Isn't that a better question than why am I in America? To me, it seems to be. That's the question I would ask. Why have I even gone through any of this? We can go deep down the rabbit hole, but I have to be careful what I say, because on the 23rd I have to report to the Romanians. But I'll tell you this, Soros and the European Union, which has become communist, have massive influence over there. And you have a huge power struggle between the American state and the Soros state. And there's 2 teams, and one of the teams wants me in jail for life. That's why I was being done.
So, but was there any help from Trump's camp to help you get here? Was there any influence there?
I have no idea.
Okay, so you don't know. Okay.
I mean, I would like to think, from a positive perspective, I'd like to be optimistic and believe that Donald Trump saw this garbage and maybe asked some questions. I like that idea. But I don't know. I have no confirmation. I have no idea. I don't know why. However, as a professional, which I am, I would argue if Kamala won, I'd be in jail. But so would Trump. And so would everyone else. So would you. So would you. And so would you. So Trump won, and perhaps the Romanians said, oh, the boss is back. We can't do this anymore. That's possible. Did Trump fly to Romania with an AK? I doubt it. But things change. There's a new administration. All the Americans are being released. Why is no one complaining about the Americans that are released from Venezuela? No one's complaining about the Americans that are released from Russia. Americans are being released all around the world because we finally have a real president again.
No, that's not me. This is Andrew Tate. He's back in America. He's on the Value Entertainment PBD podcast.
And I seem to be one of them. The Romanian states have thought and said, the boss is back. We probably can't continue to fuck with this guy for no reason. We don't even have a case. As it stands right now, guess how many indictments are important? 0. Not one. Not one.
Back at it again with the best app in the world, in my opinion, for networking. You know this because you use the app, Manet. But only if you know what new updates we got with Manet, which I'm announcing today, by the way. Today's Tuesday. With this situation that you're in the States, can UK, because UK and US have an extradition, they have a law that I think came about, Rob, if you can pull it up, I think it's 03 or 07 or something like that. Can UK say now he's in the States, can UK and US's relationship with each other do anything to you? Is that a risk of yours? Is that a concern of yours or not at all?
I'm told brown rich sexy, so I have a strong suspicion that's one of the reasons the UK hates me so much. Because the UK is now a fallen nation. It's a completely communist country. You can't speak out. Isn't it interesting that not too long ago, America would talk about going to a war and killing people for the idea of democracy? And now our allies, like the United Kingdom, will lock people up for tweets. Or even worse, Trump and Vance will put Zelensky in his place, which needed to be done. And then our allies will invite him over the next day and hug him and shake hands and promise him money.
How do you feel?
Well, what I feel like is that they're not even our allies anymore. That's sacred. You insult, if my brother puts you in your place, and I come up behind his back and offer you money, am I my brother's brother? Is that how it works? So now we're talking about the UK government. We can go long and deep into the state of the United Kingdom, because every single person I know with money is legal. Why does the UK want to lock me up? Because I'm seen as a symbol of resistance against their communism. That's why they hate me. They hate me because I teach young men to think for themselves. That's why they hate me. Because the UK's fallen due to a lack of masculinity, which is why I promote. That's why they hate me. Are they going to try and get me? Probably. If I go to UK, will I ever get out? Probably not. Am I afraid of that? No. Because I don't operate from a realm of fear. We had a 3-word instruction from the commander-in-chief. So I have to go to the UK and fight them. I'm going to do that too. Until then, I'm on the PBD podcast. I don't know what they're going to try to do. All I know is I don't trust them. And I don't think any American who understands how the world's currently operating trusts the UK government with any. Do you? Would you trust yourself to have a fair trial in the British court?
In the UK?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Exactly. So it's a setup. It's an absolute setup. Why did the UK even come from it? Once again, I be careful what I say. On the 23rd of March, I'm going to be walking into the jaws of the tiger. But I can tell you this. The UK Foreign Office was heavily involved in my entire persecution in Romania. From the first day. They didn't get involved later. From the beginning, before it even happened, the UK Foreign Office was saying, this man is a problem. We're talking about him in Parliament. He's a big problem in our schools. He's a big problem on the internet. He's a problem. Can't you take him off the internet? Can't you make him go away? That was the UK Foreign Office. When I got released from Iranian jail, then I got released from house arrest, all of a sudden, Britain trumps up charges from 2009. Supposedly in 2009, I attacked some girl. And I was arrested again for 24 hours. I don't know if you guys remember. And I sat there for 24 hours. I was like, okay, wait. Who? When? Can't tell you that. So you're saying in 2009 I attacked a girl? Yes. Who? What does it say? When? What does it say? Where? What does it say? Just says 2009 you attacked a girl. By coincidence, Tristan also. 2009 attacked a girl. Where? When? Who? Don't know. 2009, both attacked girls, no details, we made it up, extradite. Thank God the Romanian state said, no, there's not even evidence to extradite this, it's nothing to believe. So the UK state start trying to get us when Romania started to fail. UK's lost its mind. UK will look at the violence against women and then start saying my name. Oh, this is because of misogyny, Andrew Tate did this. No, what did this is a lack of a border unchecked migration, thousands of people coming over from the third world each day on dinghies who have no jobs and loiter around the streets. That's why women are not safe in London anymore. Nothing to do with me. They know it's nothing to do with me. I'm their fall guy. I'm their fall guy for everything. As soon as anything goes wrong, they mention my name in the UK. I don't stand a chance in their place. But am I afraid of them? Because I don't operate from the realm of fear. I need people at home. You know what? This whole circumstance has truly damaged my faith in humanity. COVID. Before COVID, I really thought people were better. And when I log onto Twitter and someone's like, Andrew Tate's accused of, I can accuse a ham fucking sandwich. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything what you're accused of. It matters what you're found guilty of. And then you have to argue about the legitimacy of the court. Because there's people in America who are getting wrecked by courts. That's America. Imagine, please, is there any better sign of my innocence than the fact that I won fair and square in a Romanian court under the Biden admin? Is that not the best possible badge I can wear? When Biden was president in a Romanian court, I beat my case. And they'll still sit there and, oh, but he's guilty. Did I say some stupid things on the internet 12 years ago? Yes. But I also said I'm an astronaut. And guess what? Elon's not calling. So it doesn't matter. It's not. You need a victim. You need proof. You can't say he said one stupid thing on the internet 12 years ago. Anyone who believes that's a criminal case is a dumbass. So here we are. We talk about Great Britain, they're after me. Romania's still after me. Ron DeSantis is after me. Aliens are probably after me. I don't know what to do. I'm just a man. But, you know, we're tall, brown, rich, and sexy. We're doing our best.
Back at it again with the best app in the world, in my opinion, for networking. You know this because you use the app, Manet. But only if you know what new updates we got with Manet, which countries like advocates. That's my whole life, whether it's Vietnam or Afghanistan, now Ukraine. Jeffrey Sachs basically parrots a lot of Moscow talking points that somehow Russia is threatened by the expansion of NATO.
When we hear this fear-mongering about the Putinists within our government is just ridiculous.
Trying to explain deterrence, spend money for deterrence is always a tough sell.
No, you're still spending tons of my money on something I don't care about to send over to a nation, which is corrupt as hell. Can we just stop BSing each other for a second?
If Russia absorbs Ukraine, they will crucify the people. They will annihilate the Ukrainian identity, turn them into Russians.
Oh, red herring. Like go out
If
to
the
the
guy who
argument.
smokes and spends all day arguing with strippers and OnlyFans girls can speak up.
They make better arguments than you do, bro.
Yikes!
President Trump's State of the Union will be more like a state of the world. Everyone's going to be watching. And Trump's words and decisions are rapidly rewriting the rule book of both historic alliances and present-day
That clapback was
world leaders.
ridiculous.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is talking about a coalition of the willing to defend Ukraine's freedom and independence. And maybe that is the but reality of America first. The United States is not willing to be the world's police force, at least the world prepared to pay its way. Many experts have spent the last 4 days fretting about the United States. It is suddenly allied with all the wrong people and no longer the leader of the free world. The question we're debating tonight is whether that is true. Does it protect American strength or make the free world it created a more dangerous place? If America really is no longer the leader of the free world, does the MAGA movement care? In a moment, we'll debate with Andrew Wilson, Dave Smith, Ben Hodges, and Jake Rowe. But first, two big brains who see all this rather differently. The author and political scientist, Francis Fukuyama, is coming up, and I'm joined first by the economist and public policy analyst, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Professor Sachs, great to have you back on Uncensored, particularly at this moment, which feels like a moment in history. What is your take on where we are post this extraordinary Oval Office shakedown, really, it's not going down?
It is a big moment. I think what our new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said 2 weeks ago is the key. We are in a multipolar world. I think recognizing that is the first order of us all staying alive to avoid the risks of nuclear war. President Trump said several times that his greatest concern is to avoid World War III. I say bravo on that because we had a lot of neglect at that obvious point for many, many years. So we are in a multipolar world. China is powerful. Russia is powerful. The United States is powerful. If Europe gets attacked together, which I hope it does, Europe can be powerful. India will be a great power. That's a reality. Now it's a matter of these great powers not blowing each other up, not getting into a direct war, and also making sure that the rules of the game don't confuse the rest of the world. This is feasible. I think we're on a more realistic course now than we were actually just a few weeks ago.
Do you think we're going to get a peace deal in Ukraine led by Donald Trump? And if so, how do you think this settlement will look?
Well, we know how the settlement will look when it comes, and you can look it up online. There was an April 15th, 2022 draft agreement nearly signed by Ukraine and Russia. If you reread it, as I've done several times in the last few days, it's a good agreement. There were a few details left to be concluded, but basically it was fine. But the United States and UK talked Ukraine out of the agreement, said continue to fight, don't accept neutrality. And unfortunately, since that bad advice, till today, about 1 million Ukrainians have lost their lives or been gravely wounded. It wasn't good advice. So we know what the agreement will look like. It was already just about agreed.
And so, for those who are not up to speed with that 2022 memorandum, how would you summarize it?
Yeah, the agreement was that Ukraine would be neutral, that there would be security guarantees involving all of the great powers, including Russia, which I interpret and would recommend should be through the UN Security Council. There was an annexed map which showed what the territorial lines would be, and this was at the verge of being signed. This, I think, is the basis of an agreement, which is end the war, end the bloodshed, end the destruction. The longer it goes on, the worse for Ukraine. I said that 2 years ago, that any delay meant more loss of life, more devastation. Ukraine would not win on the battlefield, and that's true. Now, Donald Trump is basically saying, look, Biden played poker. He bluffed quite a bit. He thought that the U.S. economic sanctions would bring the Russian economy to its knees. Nope. He thought that the ATACMS and the HIMARS would bring Russia to defeat. He thought that unrest inside Russia would prevent Russia from mobilizing. No, it was a poker game. Trump is saying, I don't want to hold the losing hand. We shouldn't hold the losing hand. And Ukraine only suffers from more poker with a bad hand. Now, Zelensky may be trapped by extremists around him who threaten him maybe with his life or whatever if he makes any concessions. But he says until today, well, there can't be any peace other than the full restoration of Ukraine's territory up to the borders of 1991. It's impossible. It was impossible then. It was impossible in the context of the Maidan coup. It was impossible for anybody who's followed events closely from then till now. And yet, Zelensky continues to maintain what is an utterly impossible, literally impossible condition. Because if we try to implement that, well, either Russia would win everything or it would lose and then it would escalate. to nuclear war.
Doesn't he have to, in a way, doesn't Zelensky have to maintain that public position? He can't be seen at the moment, before they've even got round the negotiating table, to be just ceding Ukrainian territory, right? I mean, no leader in that
I would
position
just
would.
remind everybody that there were already the negotiations that brought this war nearly to a close 2 years ago. They were real negotiations. I went to Turkey to speak with the negotiators. I've spoken in detail with the negotiators. There was a negotiated end to the war. The United States and UK stopped it. And that's not controversial. That's just how it is, how it's been explained by everybody.
Well, Boris Johnson was actually on my show last week and emphatically denied that he was the instigator for Ukraine continuing to fight. He said they wanted
Oh, I
to
don't know if
continue
he's the
fighting.
instigator. I don't think he was the instigator. I think the U.S. was the instigator, but I think he was the messenger.
Making America healthy again is all the rage at the moment. It might be time you to take charge of your health, as I'm doing with jacked up fitness. Diet and cardio are not enough. You need to do strength training to build up muscle and bone density while burning fat. The jacked up Power Rec Pro is an all-in-one home gym system that gives you a full body workout in a spare room or garage. Faye and Volt DC, Gloat Busy. Take 10 promo if Russia's now occupying Ukraine. They would keep, albeit I assume with no transfer of sovereignty, because Ukraine wouldn't agree to that. That Ukraine
No,
would not.
I first of all, we can't negotiate. This is.
No, I'm asking you what you think is most likely.
Right. But what I think should be done is a permanent peace, not a ceasefire or an armistice. I don't want to revisit this war and have irredentist sentiments and lobbying for a renewed war and new military buildups and all the rest. I want peace. There should be peace. Ukraine's mistake, but by the way, it wasn't Ukraine's mistake. It was an American project that we discussed that goes back to 1994, was to push NATO all the way to Ukraine. And that crossed Russia's understandable national security red line. And I would have respected Russia's national security red line because I felt that if you violated it, we would get to where we are today. So I would aim for peace, not a settlement that is grudging, imposed. We never will accept the sovereignty of Russia. What kind of peace is that? All of that is just a prelude to the next war. We should have real peace. By the way, there are three groups of people that are involved or should be involved. They're the generals. They know something about fighting, sometimes well or sometimes badly. They're the politicians. They know something about grandstanding. But then there are the diplomats. The diplomats should work out a real settlement. And, well, it's not very popular to say, I'm going to say it, the United Nations Security Council should be the ultimate place where that arrangement is settled, including China, including Russia, including Britain, France, the United States, all as co-guarantors of a true peace. Not an armistice line, not a frozen conflict, not something that Ukraine never accepts. No, an end to this war because we have more important things to do on the planet than have a future in which the question of Lugansk and Donetsk play a central role in somebody's politics.
There are people like Elon Musk calling for America to withdraw from NATO. Just quickly, what is your response to that?
It will happen if there is no settlement of this war. If Europe says, well, I'm all in favor, by the way, of Europe getting its act together. And I was in the European Parliament saying this just very recently.
I agree.
But if Europe says, we fight until 1991 borders are restored, the United States will wash its hands of all of this. I can tell you, they will not play a losing hand. They started this, by the way. The U.S. started this. The U.S. said we can go wherever we want. Stig Brzezinski laid it all out in 1997 as clearly and explicitly as one can do. So the United States started it. But the U.S. drops countries like hot potatoes. That's my whole life. whether it's Vietnam or Afghanistan, now Ukraine. So if the Europeans push so hard at Zelensky because for whatever reason as an individual says what is not in the interest of his country, it could be pretty bad for the relations between Europe and the United States. I would not recommend that at all.
Professor Sachs, great to have you back. Thank you very much.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Well, the author and political scientist Francis Fukuyama is coming up. I'll also be joined by the rest of my panel, but he's joining me now. Mr. Fukuyama, you've just listened to what Jeffrey Sachs had to say. I have to say he's been very consistent about his position on this from the very start. What is your response?
Well, it's hard to know where to begin. I think he's been wrong about this from the very start. It begins with the fundamental assessment of what Putin wants. Jeffrey Sachs basically parrots a lot of Moscow talking points that somehow Russia was threatened by the expansion of NATO, that it's really NATO that destabilized the situation, and all they're doing is seeking peace. I think that if you listen to what Putin has been saying from the beginning, he is not just interested in security. He regrets the collapse of the Soviet Union. It wasn't just that one statement from the 1990s. He said this in a very long article published before the war. He just celebrated the anniversary of the death of Anatoly Sobchak, saying that he, like Sobchak, this was the most traumatic moment when the Soviet Union fell apart. And if you think that you're going to get peace by any kind of agreement over the current lines in Ukraine, you are wrong, because he wants to reabsorb the whole of Ukraine. He wants to get Moldova, he wants to get Georgia, he wants to get all of these pieces, and then ultimately the Baltics. So I think that, Jeffrey Sachs is not being realistic about the kind of threat that we are facing.
What should Europe do, given the attitude that Donald Trump and his Vice President J.D. Vance seem to have adopted, which is that Europe has to take the lion's share of responsibility here for dealing with this war?
This is one area where I actually agree with Donald Trump. I think that Europeans ought to be spending close to 5% of GDP on their own defense, because America is proving that it is indeed a very unreliable ally, even if the Democrats manage to come back in the next few years. As a European, I would not count on America pulling their chestnuts out of the fire, and therefore they've got to be much more serious about defense cooperation. They've got to make much bigger investments in their own defense industrial base, because I think that the threat from Russia is simply not going to cease if there's some kind of a short-term agreement with Ukraine, especially under the conditions that Donald Trump has outlined, where there's basically no Western guarantee that Russia, as to what would happen if Russia starts the war again.
You wrote a book called The End of History and the Last Man in 1992. You argued then that the ascendancy of Western liberal democracy, which occurred after the Cold War and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, that humanity had reached not just the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such. That is the end point of mankind's ideological evolution, and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. Given everything that's going on now, are you still as confident that we reached that turning point, irrevocable turning point, or are you concerned that actually that might have been a little premature?
Actually, I did not say either in the original article or the book that it was irrevocable. I said that there's backwards and forwards movement.
Sorry, I mischaracterized you, I'm sorry.
No, the real question is there, first of all, the history I was talking about is not events. It is the broad social evolution of societies. And the question is there a superior form of civilization that is going to supplant Western liberal democracy? And I, frankly, for all of the backsliding that has occurred in existing democracies in recent years, I don't see that higher alternative. I don't think we're all going to look like China in another 50 years, because I do think that people want basic freedom, and I think that they need governments that are restrained by checks and balances, which is the essence of a liberal democracy. So we're going through a very tough period. There's no question that democracy is threatened. I guess the one thing I really didn't anticipate is that the threat to liberal democracy could be so prominent in the United States itself. That is something I really had not anticipated. But here we are. I think that the international liberal order is being threatened, but I think the liberal order in the United States, and by liberal, I don't mean liberal in the left-right sense as in the United States. Liberal meaning the fundamental rule of law, the constraint of checks and balances in a constitutional system. I did not expect that it would come under the kind of threat domestically that it is experiencing today.
I don't always pick the healthiest food options, and I'm sure you don't either. We're all human and we're all busy. That's why doctors created Field of Greens. One delicious glass of Field of Greens is like nutritional armor of your body. Each fruit and vegetable in this drink was selected by a doctor for specific health benefit. There's a heart health group, lungs, kidney groups, metabolism. It's all very complicated. But not with Field of Greens, because it's all in there. It gives me energy, but it also gives me the confidence that I can be traveling or, shock horror, enjoying a sneaky burger. And I'll still be getting all the nutrition my body needs daily. Only Field of Greens makes you the better health promise. The doctor will notice your improved health, or you'll get your money back. We've teamed up to give you a 20% discount on your first order. Just use promo code PEERS at brickhousenutrition.com/PEERS. That's code PEERS at brickhousenutrition.com/PEERS. Are we seeing a complete reframing geopolitically of the world order?
Well, Donald Trump has a very different view of the world in which basically democratic values are completely absent. When Jeff Sachs talks about, a multipolar world, this is a world in which, the basic value of democracy as an organizing principle is absent. And the world then revolves simply around power, and it revolves around great powers that can decide to do with the rest of the world what they please. I think that for the last 70 years, we've been trying to build a different kind of world in which rules both domestically and internationally would try to limit the pure exercise of power. And I think that, we're going to suffer and move into that world where it's simply a contest of power. I mean, there was no discussion of China. Is China then going to say, well, if the United States can take Greenland and Panama, we have every right to take back Taiwan. And I think that invites further use of force and further instability. It's not going to lead to, a more peaceful world.
Are we more or less likely to be heading to some kind of nuclear conflict?
Well, that's another red herring. I think that there were many red lines that Putin laid down that have been crossed. It's insane to think that they would resort to nuclear weapons over anything going on in Ukraine, because they are going to come out the losers if that happens, and they know that. Nuclear deterrence, continues to hold, and I think that, making preemptive concessions out of some kind of abstract fear of World War III is simply wrong.
Francis Fukuyama, thank you very much indeed for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
So is America no longer the leader of the free world? And if so, should Americans care? Joining me to debate this, Andrew Wilson, host of The Crucible, the host of the Parliament podcast, Dave Smith, the Air Force veteran and YouTuber, Jake Rowe. Well, welcome to all of you. Let me just start with you, Jake, if I may. We're really at a very critical moment, it seems to me, for the world order, in a sense, in that what happened in the Oval Office on Friday sent shockwaves around the world about whether America was going to continue being with Europe when it came to issues like the invasion of a sovereign democratic European country by a Russian dictator. How concerned are you that we might see a genuine fracturing here?
Last Friday was shocking, but unfortunately I'm not surprised. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance just trashed the 80-year transatlantic partnership that has kept all of us safe in the Western world. And now all of our allies are asking, can we trust Donald Trump? Can we trust the United States? Are they a good faith partner? Canada is already preparing for the worst. And now all of our partners in Europe, as well as our partners in the Asia Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, the entire democratic world is wondering, will the United States honor their commitments? If a treaty has been signed by the U.S. Congress, Donald Trump can't arbitrarily break it. That's in violation of federal and international law. But right now, Donald Trump says, I have the power to do whatever I want. I can make law, I can discern what the law is. Nobody can stop me, nobody can check me. And we've entered a new age. I don't think anyone alive today really remembers what it was like back in the age of empires, prior to World War I, prior to World War II. And that's what Donald Trump and the Putinists and our own government want to do. The United States wants to ally. Our government wants to ally with Russia against our smaller, weaker, democratic, traditional allies. These alliances were built on shared values, respecting democracy, international law, human rights, three things that Donald Trump doesn't care about, three things that Vladimir Putin doesn't care about. And if the American people don't rise up now and put a stop to this, then we're going to have a lot more wars.
Okay.
A lot more wars, as Xi wants to redraw the maps, Putin wants to redraw the maps, and Trump wants to redraw the maps.
Okay. Andrew Wilson, the response to that.
Yeah, so I mean, more panic mongering from the stupid leftists. So anything they can do to say, oh, Zelensky's a hero. This guy, by the way, paradox of freedom, who's pressing people into service in this country don't want to go while he's in a great battle for freedom. He went to the White House and completely embarrassed himself. He decided to have a massive argument in front of the American people, which should not have happened, in the middle of trying to get some type of peace treaty together on behalf of his own nation. The leftists hold him accountable? Of course not. Instead, somehow, it's always Donald Trump's fault. By the way, this is our treasure, my money that's going over to Ukraine in order to fund this rapidly growing bloodbath that you so desperately want. Well, at the same time, you say, well, Andrew, don't you think that it's all because Putin is so bad? It's like, look, there's no good guys here. Stop pretending that I need to follow this dialectic that there's good guys who are involved in this. Ukraine was always a corrupt government. The Russian government's a corrupt oligarchical government. They're at war with each other. And I don't want my treasure to go over there. I don't want my kids to go over there and fight a war. I'm sorry, but I think that we will refrain from entering into another European theater. As you bring up, people don't really understand what it was like, these pre-imperial dynasties. Yeah, the thing is, it's like, we do have grandparents or great-grandparents left alive who were part of these European theaters, and they were bloodbaths, absolute bloodbaths. And what we need right now is a peace treaty, not any more of your cocksure posturing about, the good guy Zelensky and the bad guy Putin. It's a false dialectic, and I'm sick of it.
Dave Smith, it's very interesting to me to see the difference between the way a lot of people in America are viewing this, particularly the Oval Office showdown, and the way countries like the UK here or the European countries are viewing it. But ultimately, everybody would like to see peace. Do you think we're more or less near to a peace settlement than we were before Friday?
Oh, I think we're closer to one, and I think it's great. And Andrew is spot on. And look, I mean, I know I've said this before on your show, Pierce, here, but when you hear this fear-mongering about the Putinists in our government, I mean, look, at least during Joseph McCarthy in the Senate and in the House on Un-American Activities, during what is known now as McCarthyism, at least back then there were some actual communists. The idea that there are Putinists within our government is just ridiculous. And, I love how everybody freaks out when Donald Trump is doing what is the scariest thing in D.C., talking about potentially ending a war. And then we hear these lectures about, the power of the president. Meanwhile, Barack Obama, not that long ago, forget, obviously, the Constitution is very clear that Congress has to declare a war. We haven't declared a war since World War II, but at least George W. Bush got, some authorizations from the Congress. Barack Obama went to war in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen, not even anything. from Congress, and we don't hear a freak out about like the power of the president until one is actually discussing the possibility of ending a war. And look, I mean, what Zelensky did in the Oval Office has got to be the greatest strategic blunder that I've ever seen in my life. For him to think that when he is in a desperate situation, completely reliant on Donald Trump, he thought the way to accomplish this was to go in there and try to out-alpha Donald Trump in a language he barely speaks. I mean, he did the biggest disservice to his own country and this entire effort. But you know what? I'm fine with that, because the whole thing is that America was never supposed to be a global empire, and the American people don't want to be a global empire. We're supposed to be a constitutionally limited republic, and there is no such thing as a constitutionally limited world empire. We should get out of the empire business. It's been nothing but a disaster for the American people.
Well, let me bring in Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, retired US commander in Europe. General, great to have you on Uncensored. You've heard there the conflicting views. From your perspective, with all your extensive military background, what did you make, first of all, of what you saw in the Oval Office on Friday?
Well, thanks for the privilege, and extensive military service is another way of saying I'm really old. So thanks for the euphemism.
My apologies for the ageist way I framed that.
Look, I have to say, Friday was one of the hardest days for me I've had in a long time. It was very difficult to watch how President Zelensky was treated in there. And look, you could criticize his, as Dave just did, the fact that he pushed back there in the Oval Office. But you know what? I mean, he's leading a country that's fighting for its survival, and he was being bombarded with absolute false information. And it also revealed to me, or made it clear to me, that the people around the president do not understand the nature of war or why people fight. This notion that, you got to stop, you don't have the cards. George Washington sure didn't have the cards. The Taliban didn't have the cards. The Vietnamese did not have the cards, but yet all of them defeated much larger, technically superior forces. And so I think that what's missing from this is a clarity of what is our strategic objective. What are we trying to accomplish? What do we want in Europe? Why does Ukraine matter? It's not charity, obviously. It's because the Chinese are watching to see, are we serious when we talk about respect for sovereignty, respect for international law, respect for freedom of navigation. And if the Chinese see that we're not even willing to do this in Europe, then I don't think they'll be very impressed with what we say and do in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, our economy is tied to Europe. The biggest trading bloc in the world, or the trading relationship, is between Europe and the United States. And so if Ukraine fails, you're going to see about another 10 million Ukrainian refugees heading into Poland and Germany and Western Europe. That affects us. So the Biden administration failed to do it. The Trump administration has not yet done it, to say our strategic objective.
Before I go to Andrew to respond to that, General, just from a pure military perspective, is there any way Ukraine can either win this war with enough support or chuck Russia out of the 20% of Ukraine it's currently occupied? Are either of those two things remotely achievable?
Absolutely. Look, this war has been going on 11 years. 11 years, and Russia still, with every advantage, only controls 20% of Ukraine. They have gone a total of 60 kilometers in the last year from Avdiivka to the outskirts of Pokros. That's it, despite enormous advantages, huge casualties. The great Russian Black Sea Fleet, nobody even talks about them anymore. The Russian Air Force failed its two main tasks, achieve air superiority and interdict the lines of communication from Poland and Ukraine. They're not able to do it. So it's clear that the Russians do not have the ability to break through or overrun the Ukrainian defenders the way their grandfathers did in the Second World War. That just doesn't exist. So, and this is without the United States actually committing, or European countries actually committing helping Ukraine win. You know, the Biden administration never could say we want Ukraine to win. And so you ended up with this sort of drip support. And of course, I think if the Europeans are finally waking up, that they realize that they are going to pay an enormous price if Ukraine fails. And so about 50% of the ammunition that's produced in Europe today goes to customers in the Middle East and in Africa. So it's not like they don't have industrial capacity. They have not yet shown the political will or the strategic backbone to do what needs to be done.
Okay, and Andrew Wilson, some people on the conservative right in America want to see Zelensky resign and have somebody else to deal with here. What do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, there hasn't been he suspended all elections in his nation and probably shouldn't be the sitting president.
But he's hang on. On that point, though, just to be clear, the country remains under martial law, so it's supposed to have an election, I think, last April, May.
If this happened here in the United States, these guys would be screaming bloody murder, that Trump was a dictator, that he was a neo-Nazi, that he was a fascist authoritarian. If this happened under martial law in the United States, these guys would be screaming for blood right now. For some reason, though, when it's Zelensky, it's fine because it's under martial law. That makes it all better. They can press people into service. That's okay. They don't mind that.
But how could they? Okay, but how could they? But Andrew, how could they realistically have a free and fair election, given that 6.5 million Ukrainians have left the country as refugees? Hang on. Let me finish. 3.5 million more are living under Russian occupation. They clearly can't vote freely or fairly in the way they may wish to. Plus, they're still at war. So there's a front line which has thousands and thousands more Ukrainians battling it out every day who wouldn't be able to vote either. How does this election even happen? Never mind the fact that under their constitution, which got parliamentary massive support, dictates they can't have an election while they're under martial law anyway. But how do you have a free, fair election, given those set of circumstances?
Yeah, perhaps you couldn't. No, there are war-torn regions before which have had elections. But let's just grant for a second that you couldn't. So what? These guys would still be screaming bloody murder if the shoe was on the other foot here in the United States, and it was impossible for us to do a free.
But nobody did when the UK.
They would still be screaming about
but nobody did when the UK didn't have an election for 10 years before and during World War II. Everybody understood. There was no criticism of that. There was a realization.
Era with people who weren't lunatics, and now the left is a bunch of lunatics, and they apply a double standard, and they have what is called the paradox of freedom. And right now, they don't care that people are being pressed in the front lines. He brings up Washington, who was using a volunteer militia. Nobody was getting pressed into service in order to fight off the British. These people are lunatics, and they're bloodthirsty monsters, ultimately. Anytime we try to move towards peace, as Dave Smith rightly points out, these people want to do everything possible to not do that because, Putin might get a W. It's like, look, ultimately, I'm going to say this again, reiterate it again. Neither one of these are the good guys. Ukraine has corrupt governments, has a history of corruption. Putin and Russia, history of corruption. Very, very bad countries doing very bad things to each other. The Europeans, if they cared so much, how come they only recently started to actually fund this? When
I agree with you.
There was only 4 of them, 4 countries, including ours, that even had 3% of its GDP going to this conflict until Trump demanded it. So it's like, no, I don't buy this narrative that, we always cared about our treasury. You cared when it was when our treasury was going over there and funding the entire thing, right? Suddenly there's a blank check. I'm sure that the corrupt Ukrainian government loves having our blank checks go over there where they pocket half of it and only half of it goes to the war effort. I don't trust any of these people.
All right, Jake, I mean, there's no doubt, and I said this from the moment Donald Trump first started talking about NATO being potentially obsolete if the member countries didn't pay their basic financial dues, which they weren't doing in the main. There's no doubt, given how many more are now paying their dues or more, that memo got loudly received. But Europe is still, most countries, including this country, UK, have not been stepping up properly on their own defences. And there comes a point, is there not, where I completely understand why a lot of Americans are simply done with being the global police officer. Why should they be? If the Europeans aren't prepared to take their own defences seriously enough, why should America constantly feel obliged to come in and spend American taxpayer money on bailing them out?
The honest answer is because America has been writing the security policy for these countries since World War II. If America makes all the decisions, America calls the shots in this alliance, what incentive is there for our allies to spend increased amounts? Should they have been meeting that 2% NATO guideline? Of course they should. But they were lulled into a false sense of security, both from the United States and from the Russians. This entire plan of making Europe dependent on Russian energy exports, nations that trade together don't go to war with each other, we now know that's a lie. This was a post-communist collapse experiment. What if we economically intertwined ourselves with the Chinese, with the Russians? We make this globalization effort in order to connect them. That way, they won't want to risk their trade partners in order to go to war with their neighbors. And what we've learned in the last 3 years is that we were wrong. We never should have made our economy, our energy needs dependent on either the Chinese or the Russians. Because they're dictatorships and they're authoritarians and they want to be empires. They want to invade their smaller, weaker neighbors or topple their governments, either create proxy states or redraw the maps. So now, nobody can deny the reality. Nobody can deny the truth. Every democracy in the world has to reevaluate their trade partnerships and their food and energy supplies, because you cannot be reliant on dictators. You cannot be reliant on either China or Russia, because they will use those trade relations as leverage to get what they want on the battlefield, to get concessions from democratic nations that do try to negotiate in good faith. When the Russians and the Chinese will never negotiate in good faith. They will always make maximum demands. They will always lie. They will always cheat. They will always steal. You can't trust them. You shouldn't be working with them. And right now, Donald Trump is trying to negotiate an aluminum deal with the Russians. Donald Trump is trying to resume direct flights between the United States and Moscow on stolen planes. All of these aircraft that the Russians stole 3 years ago, Donald Trump wants to pretend like it never happened. We're trying to increase diplomatic staff when we know these people are all FSB agents and spies, here just to subvert, undermine, and weaken the United States. Donald Trump is opening up the gates and making every American less safe and our country weaker. This has been a disaster the last 3 days, and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are the ones driving all of this right now.
Okay, I mean, Dave Smith, I would not share some of that categorization, because I don't think this is by any means done, this scenario. I think that Trump ultimately is desperate to bring peace. He prefers peace to war. He said he'd do this before he came into office. He wants to get it done, as he does in Gaza as well. He wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize. There are lots of incentives here for Donald Trump to deliver on what he said he would deliver on. So I don't share that slightly apocalyptic view of where we are. But I also think Jake makes some very good points about, when you dance with the devil, you get pricked by the horns. And a lot of people believe that the way Donald Trump interacts with people like Putin and Xi and Kim Jong-un and others is detrimental to America's national interest. What do you feel?
I mean, this is global politics always involves interacting with bad people, and it only seems like the propaganda about this, arises when it's somebody who we want to support a war against. There's how about the way we interact with the Saudis or the Israelis, for that matter? The greatest thing that ever happened in the history of the world has happened over the last 30 years, and it's 1 billion people have been pulled out of extreme poverty, and a big part of that was because Richard Nixon went and talked to Mao Zedong, the most evil man who ever lived, by the numbers. And so, look, I just think there's always this fear mongering that is associated with every single war. And you mentioned age before. I'm old enough to have lived through a lot of these wars right now. America's been in a constant state of war since at least 9/11, and of course we know that with the war in Iraq, it was going to be a mushroom cloud over Kansas, right? Saddam Hussein was going to give the weapons that he didn't have to the terrorists he wasn't friends with, and then they were going to nuke America, and they convinced everyone in America that this was the case. And we hear the same thing now, although weirdly, there seems to be something so contradictory here between making the argument that Vladimir Putin is so weak that he can't even take over Ukraine, even though he's been at war with them since 2014, or however you want to calculate when the war actually started. And yet also he's a huge threat to reconstitute the Soviet Union, where we just hear it asserted that China will move on Taiwan if Vladimir Putin gets to keep his percentage of Ukraine, which I'm not even saying is impossible, but it's certainly not an inevitability. By the way, I don't think we could do anything if China wanted to move on Taiwan tomorrow. And I think Americans have to get out of this empire mindset. Like, just for example, imagine, let's just say there was the political will and there was the desire. Let's say that the U.S. wanted to take Mexico City. We had decided we were going to do that. What could Russia do to stop us? What could China do to stop us? Nothing. The idea is ridiculous. If we decided we wanted to do that, then we do that, period. Because we're the bigger, stronger country, and that's not great, but it is the way of the world. Look, the bottom line here is that people, and I will say like me at this point, because I've been talking about this conflict on big platforms for years at this point now, the head of NATO, Stoltenberg, I always get his name wrong, but he himself said that in late 2021, Vladimir Putin drafted a treaty between Russia and NATO, and what he was asking for was a promise that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO. And he said for that he would not invade. And you know, the people like you just interviewed the great Jeffrey Sachs before we started this panel. The people like that. That's the deal we could have had if we had listened to people like that. And now, oh my God, wouldn't you give anything for that deal? Imagine you could have all of Ukraine, minus Crimea, under Ukrainian control, and all you have to give was the promise of bringing Ukraine into NATO. Now, NATO's not even on the table anymore, and there's no way Ukraine's going to keep 100% of its geographic integrity from the beginning of the war. This is the reality of the situation. Governments are not perfect, and neither is ours, but peace is better than war. This war did not need to happen, and it's been an absolute disaster, worst of all for the Ukrainian people.
On the issue of the election, I think it's worth noting, and I'll come to you, General, if I may, for a response to this, but Ukraine's parliament voted overwhelmingly to approve a resolution affirming the legitimacy of Zelensky's saying office, asserting the constitutionality of deferring the presidential election while the country's at war. The 268 Parliament members present voted unanimously to approve the resolution, while 12 other MPs were not present during the session. So that seems to me to be a very clear democratic mandate by the elected officials of Ukraine to endorse not having an election until the war is over.
Well, some of us may not like the fact that Ukrainian martial law includes the suspension of the elections, but that is the law. And so, and then the fact that the Rada made the decision to vote and give that sort of public endorsement, to me, that's compelling. Now, I do want to give Dave Smith credit. I finally heard him say something today that I agreed with. This war could have been avoided if we, the West, led by the United States, had responded appropriately after Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, if we had responded appropriately after they invaded Ukraine in 2014, and that's not a game. I mean, the whole world saw Russia invade Ukraine in 2014, and we did nothing when they jumped over the Obama red line in Syria. So this war is a result of failed deterrence, and trying to explain deterrence and spend money for deterrence is always a tough sell, because you have to convince taxpayers and voters and legislators of what the risk is and why you have to do it. That's hard. But it is much, much cheaper, obviously, to do that, to have successful deterrence, as we did for over 70 years after the Second World War, versus dealing with the failed deterrence we're dealing with right now. I think that for Andrew, I would just offer, as I'm pretty sure you know this, the amount of money, the 120 to 180 billion, depending on how you include in that amount. It's clearly not 350, but the amount of money that the United States has spent or contributed towards helping Ukraine, the overwhelming majority of that money is spent in the United States. It's not pallets of ammunition of money. that are loaded onto a C-17 and then delivered into Ukraine. It's money that is spent replacing or buying ammunition, refurbishing old equipment that is then loaned or given to Ukraine. And of course, there are no U.S. troops in Ukraine except for those officers that are assigned to the embassy in the Office of Defense Cooperation, whose task is to make sure accountability of every javelin, every artillery round, every set of binoculars. Oh, you can shake your head if you want to. That's a fact. So
why don't you stop pretending that we don't have United States Special Forces on the ground right this second? We don't have CIA agents all over Ukraine right this second. Why don't you just stop pretending? Because it's nonsense. And we all know it's nonsense. This is the way, hang on, this is the way it's been going for a long time. And when you talk about, well, Andrew, what we're actually doing is we're spending a whole bunch of money on refurbishing equipment here instead of buying new equipment to send over there. So what? No, you're still spending tons of my money on something I don't care about to send over to a nation, which is corrupt as hell. So can we just stop BSing each other for a second? Yes, the United States has boots on the ground there. Yes, we have special forces units there. We have CIA agents there, and we would be fools to pretend we don't.
It's an interesting argumentative style that you had. And, I always, when people start calling me names or whatever, then I really, the
I
credibility.
didn't call you any names, sir. I didn't call you any names.
Okay.
What was the name that I called you?
I think that the key is this idea of trying to
I'm offended by tone. Just don't like tone. Maybe a little tone policing getting worked in there. Maybe that southern drawl, we try to make yourself sound logical because you have it, doesn't work so well on me. You can't gaslight me with this stuff. It's nonsense. Yes, there's boots on the ground there. Yes, there's been boots on the ground there probably since the beginning. Yes, we're spending $100 billion plus on equipment that we then either send over there. And by the way, there's getting money going over there too. This is such nonsense. Just stop gaslighting the American people. Stop it. We're not stupid. We've seen this on repeat so many times now. So many times.
Let him talk. Let him talk.
So, respond. The idea of ending the war, of course, is exactly what we would like to do, but it needs to be an end that is sustainable. And I think President Zelensky understands that he can't just sign or accept an end to the war where Russia will wait for us to lose interest, because we always do lose interest, and then they pick right back up with a resumption of the conflict after we have left or turned our back. And so I think it's reasonable to expect Ukrainians to want some sort of guarantee, whether that's continued aid, continued equipment, or presence. They haven't. I don't know exactly what that looks like. Obviously, I would prefer to see Ukraine in NATO. We get better the day they join NATO. It's not going to happen anytime soon, especially if the United States is not willing to do it. The Biden administration also is not willing to do it. But how do we end it when you're the partner on the other side, the negotiating partner on the other side of the table is Vladimir Putin? I mean, there's no reason to have confidence that they will live up to any agreement because there's nothing in their history. And I do appreciate that Andrew likes my North Florida accent.
Let me bring in Dave. I want to bring in Dave.
Yeah.
We've got.
Yeah, I never quite understand this argument that seems to just logically fall apart, that we can't end a war because the war might pick up at some point in the future, and therefore if we don't have a perfect guarantee that, but I mean, what, even if it, I mean, I don't know, I've heard the entire time through this war, including on your show, Pierce, that if Putin was successful in Ukraine, then he was going to move on Poland, right? Like, this is what Joe Biden kept saying. This was the official, fear-mongering of this war. And so if you're telling me that even NATO membership isn't a guarantee, then yes, we never have a perfect guarantee. But you also don't have a guarantee from any government in the history of the world. That doesn't mean that ending a war isn't still a positive. And I just want to go back to what was, brought up initially. The idea that this was a case of failed deterrence, and that if only we had deterred Vladimir Putin sooner, then we could have avoided this whole thing. I mean, let's just kind of quickly overlook the last 20 years of U.S. foreign policy in Europe. We've expanded NATO all the way to Vladimir Putin's borders. We constantly floated out the idea for years that we would include Ukraine at some point, give them full membership. We said point blank in 2008 at the Bucharest summit that we were bringing Georgia and Ukraine into NATO before Russia ended up going to war with Georgia there. And then look, Piers, like we've done this before on the show too, right? But just imagine, if you can, have a little bit of strategic empathy and put yourself in the Russian shoes. If Russia, let's say the Soviet Union had never collapsed, and the Soviet Union had poured $100 million into a Mexican street protest that overthrew a democratically elected government, and they have been saying for years they were going to bring Mexico into their military alliance, and then when the new government came up, they recognized them immediately and started arming them, as Donald Trump foolishly bragged about the other day with Zelensky in the Oval Office. Pierce, do you think Americans would feel that was deterrence, or do you think we might view that as a provocation? Kind of like, it's just,
Stop
by the
using
way,
logic,
when
Dave.
Donald
Stop
Trump...
using logic, Dave.
Well, look,
Well, let me
Donald
answer, rather
Trump
than me
was-
trying to answer a very logical question, let me get Jake to respond to that.
So, the first thing that he said, what is the concern if Russia takes Ukraine? If Russia can't even go 60 kilometers deep and take the city of Pokrovsk, what is the threat to NATO? And it's, yes, absorbing a country of 40 million people, absorbing a country that has $10 trillion of natural resources under the ground. It's the strategic location on the Black Sea. If Russia absorbs Ukraine, they will Russify the people. They will annihilate the Ukrainian identity, turn them into Russians, and then start press-ganging them into the military and send them into meat wave attacks against the Baltics, against Poland in the Slavka Gap. We're trying to prevent Russia from getting stronger. And I don't care about what Russia thinks or feels. Russia is not a great power. Russia has an economy the same size roughly as Spain. Do you think Spain is a great power that the United States should respect?
Dude. Listen. We are in the business of trying to be a world empire, and we are going broke. We're $36 trillion in debt because we can't afford to do it. We've blown $8 trillion in the last 20
Then
years
why
on
is
foreign
Donald
wars.
Trump talking
And you're
about
telling
invading
me-
Greenland? Why is Donald Trump talking about invading
I don't agree
Canada?
with
Why
that.
is Donald Trump talking
Okay,
about
fine.
annexing Canada? Why is he talking about
That
ethnic
has nothing
cleansing
to
in the
do with
Gaza
this
Strip?
conversation.
That
Okay,
is
okay,
empire.
you lost the red
MAGA
herring.
is the one
Stay on
pushing
topic,
for
Dave.
America to be
Stay
a
on
global
topic,
empire.
Dave. That's what you're
Total
moving.
red herring. Total red herring.
Total red herring. By the way,
Like
Is the guy who smokes and spends all day arguing with strippers and OnlyFans girls going to speak up? I don't
They
know.
make better arguments than you do,
General
bro.
Dan Hodges,
It's not my
the
fault that you have
Canadian
low
military
IQ, low IQ
country,
being a stripper
you're
and
a hero,
OnlyFans.
you're an expert. These other guys, I can't take them serious.
And who are you for anyone to give a shit about taking serious?
You need to have a lot of pedigree in order to make an argument, bro.
Yes, say that you can't take me seriously, but you just completely did. You had no response to the argument. Listen, the current estimate I've seen is that Russia's GDP is about $2 trillion a year. Try to keep perspective on this. That is less than a third.
Is Spain a great power that we should respect? Is Italy a great power that we should respect?
Well, aren't we all missing? Okay, let me bring the elephant in the room into the debate. Nobody's mentioning the nuclear arsenal that Russia has. That's what makes it different to any of these other countries. Russia, on its own, has more nukes than any other country, including the United States. That is a fact. There are, I think, 9 countries in the world that have nukes. The UK has some. France has some. There are American nukes in a number of other European countries. But let's be clear, when it comes to deterrence, there's probably only one deterrent that Putin really cares about, and that is a nation that is nuclear armed. And when I'll bring the general in here for this. When I interviewed President Zelensky 2 weeks ago, he did say, as part of the security that he wanted, maybe we could have our nuclear weapons back, because of course, when Ukraine became an independent country, they had a lot of Russian nuclear missiles on their territory, a lot. And they agreed to give them all back to Russia, but only because Russia, America, and the UK gave undertakings. They would be guaranteed defence. And that hasn't materialised. And so you could argue, if you go right back to the start of all this, or when Ukraine went out on its own, had they been allowed to keep some of those nuclear missiles that were Russian-owned but were on Ukraine territory, had they been able to keep them and remain a nuclear power, that might have been the only thing that would have deterred Vladimir Putin. Now, what would you say to that?
Well, of course, you have to take Russia's nuclear capabilities seriously. They have a lot of them. They don't care how many innocent people might be killed. But I think that we it was a mistake of the Biden administration to assume that if Ukraine was successful and we did too much, that Russia might retaliate with a nuclear weapon of some sort. And I think there was never a chance they were going to do that because there was no benefit to the Russians to use.
Would Russia have invaded Ukraine if Ukraine had retained some of the nuclear weapons they had to give up back in the mid-90s?
Well, that's a fair question to ask, but I don't know. I mean, having a nuclear force is incredibly expensive. Almost half of UK's defense budget is tied up just in their nuclear force. So could Ukraine have managed to continue a nuclear deterrent that was modernized, ready, prepared, when in fact, it's not just about having those big silver bullets. It's also the whole system to be able to deliver it. And I'm not sure that's I can't answer that with any sort of assurance. But nuclear deterrence, this has always been one of the most important contributions of the United States to NATO was the nuclear capability that we brought, as well as what UK and France possess as well. So we do live in the nuclear world. I think it was unfortunate that we allowed ourselves to be deterred by Russian threats of nuclear weapons, because now everybody else that wants a nuke or has one or is trying to get one sees that we could be deterred by just threat of a
I totally agree. I was saying that actually throughout the entire time. Every time Putin was in a bit of a hot situation, he just rattled his nuclear saber in a threatening and aggressive manner rather than the deterrent, defensive manner you're supposed to do with your nuclear deterrent. And
Rouge and Jock, what's up, bro? What's up?
That's not how a nuclear deterrent is supposed to work. It's supposed to, if you've got as many as he's got, which the Americans and the UK and France collectively would have, rattle them back. That's the point. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you. Fascinating debate. I really appreciate it. Thank you all very much. This Organized is proudly independent. The only boss around here is me. If you enjoy our show, we ask only one simple thing. Hit subscribe on YouTube and follow Peter Uncensored on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. In return, we will continue our mission to inform, irritate, and entertain. We'll do it all for free. Independent, uncensored media has never been more critical, and we couldn't do it without you. Al Jazeera podcast. Today, Europe prepares to go at it alone on Ukraine.
Yes, President Donald Trump is temporarily pausing all pending U.S. military aid for Ukraine.
Yikes.
It says Washington is reviewing whether billions of dollars given to Kyiv is contributing to a solution to the war with Russia.
A plan takes shape to help Ukraine avoid defeat and keep peace with or without U.S. support. I'm Kevin Hurton, and this is The Take. European leaders, the Prime Minister of the UK, and even the King, all gathered in London Sunday to work
Chilling.
for Ukraine.
Just doing a chill stream.
Europe must do the heavy lifting, but to support peace in our continent.
We literally just over here chilling. Couple of people in the room. Oh, here's your boy. What's this guy's name? Judge Napolitano.
Today is Tuesday, March 4th, 2025. Professor Jeffrey Sachs joins us now. Professor Sachs, welcome here. I want to spend some time with you talking about the rumors that Donald Trump and the president may announce tonight the withdrawal of the United States from NATO and the effects of that. But before we do, on Sunday evening, Prime Minister Netanyahu manifested yet again an effort to sabotage the ceasefire with Hamas when he announced that the IDF would prevent the introduction of food, water, and medicine into Gaza under the pretext of, are you ready for this? It's being stolen by bandits. Therefore, we will starve everybody. How can President Trump tolerate this? How can the West tolerate this? I know it's been going on for a year and a half, but how can they tolerate it?
Well, the situation in Israel and Palestine is similar to the situation in Ukraine. In both cases, there are manipulations by the governments, whether it's Zelensky in Ukraine or Netanyahu, which believe that they have the U.S. Wrapped around their finger, and that they can use the U.S. for whatever bullying or maximalist demands they want. When it comes to Ukraine, Trump has finally drawn the line, and he's done it properly. He said to Zelensky, you need to make peace. If you don't make peace, we're not supporting you anymore. And the most recent news is that the United States has suspended all military aid to Ukraine. This is the right approach, given Zelensky's attitude, which is maximalist demands and therefore continued war. Not just maximalist, delusional demands. But when it comes to Israel, the situation is the same. Netanyahu makes maximalist demands, thinking that the United States will unconditionally back those demands. What are Israel's maximalist demands? To control all of Palestinian territories, to rule over millions of Palestinians in Gaza, in the occupied territories of the West Bank, and in East Jerusalem, contrary to international law, and as a total, complete blockage of peace. What Netanyahu represents is completely outrageous. It's a violation of every principle, whether moral or legal or pragmatic in terms of peace. But he operates this way because he thinks the U.S. is wrapped around his finger. And so far, that has been the case, actually. While Ukraine did get, massive amounts of U.S. aid to pursue aims that made no sense, when it comes to Israel, the Israel lobby has really effectively dominated U.S. foreign policy decision-making of the United States, even leading the United States to wars in the Middle East on behalf of Netanyahu's grandiose, delusional visions. And this is essentially what Donald Trump faces. Now, can he break free of the Israel lobby, some of which are his principal financial supporters in the election campaign, let's face it. But that's what he needs to do as President of the United States. He needs to say, sorry, American foreign policy is American. It's for American interests. It's not for extremist Israeli positions. It's not for delusions, whether based on biblical ideas that some of Netanyahu's supporters pursue, or whether it's based on misguided ideas of American power. Israel should not run American foreign policy. The United States should. The job of an American president is to do what President Trump has done vis-a-vis Ukraine, which is to say we're not in this for endless war. By the way, the United States provoked that war over 30 years, so Trump is ending a series of disasters that were to a large extent U.S.-made. In the case of Israel, Donald Trump needs to do the same thing. He needs to say American foreign policy interest is for peace in the Middle East, for American good relations with the Arab world, for American support for Israel's security, but not for America's support for Israel's illegal, brutal, even war criminal occupation and devastation of Gaza and the West Bank. That's the choice in front of President Trump.
I mean, you could count on one hand the voices that you and I have heard, and of the five fingers, here are two of them, characterizing the use of the deprivation of food, water, and medicines as a war crime, which it is under international law. This does not require an ideological analysis, but you don't hear a peep from anybody. You don't hear it from the Europeans. You don't hear it from the United
Bandits.
States. I haven't even heard it from the UN.
What's up? What does that mean?
When the dust settles, and I mean that both literally and figuratively, in Gaza. Hundreds of thousands of people will have died because of Israel's brutality. This is a mass bloodletting. Whatever one says, what Israel is doing is criminal by every standard of international law as well as basic morality. Israel has deliberately killed tens of thousands of innocent women and children and starved a population of 2 million in Gaza. And while this is going on, Israel is committing massive crimes in the West Bank that are less reported because the bigger crimes are in Gaza. When students protested, they were arrested. Universities tried to tamp down the protests, but the students were watching the TikTok videos showing Israeli soldiers celebrating the destruction and murder of Palestinians in Gaza. This is so tragic, so much in front of our eyes, so shocking. And I always say it's the job of an American president to put the brakes on war. President Trump is ably doing that in the case of Ukraine, and he should do the same in the Middle East. By the way, when Zelensky doesn't want to listen to President Trump says, well, okay, then you're on your own. Say the same to Netanyahu. It's not that the U.S. can force Netanyahu to do something. It's just that Netanyahu's using U.S. bombs, U.S. munitions, U.S. artillery, U.S. intelligence, U.S. finance to do it. So President Trump just needs to say, we're not going to be party to this any longer. Okay, we can't stop you, but you can't do it without us. That's what President Trump said to Zelensky, and it's exactly what he should say to Netanyahu.
Professor Sachs, yesterday, in what is arguably an act of perjury, Secretary of State Rubio signed a document certifying that Israel is in a state of emergency and therefore needs $4 billion with a B dollars worth of military equipment without authorization from the Congress, channeling his predecessor, Anthony Blinken. There really doesn't seem to be much difference between the two, except on the Ukraine side, where Rubio is willing to speak with Foreign Minister Lavrov.
Yes, if I could make a more general point about that. American legislation is filled with the word emergency. If the president declares an emergency, basically we have one person rule in the United States. We once had a Revolutionary War to move away from one person rule. But since the U.S. security state was begun in the immediate aftermath of World War II, Congress ceded its constitutional duties, its responsibilities, by putting these emergency clauses into legislation. And not surprisingly, the executive uses the claim of emergency to circumvent basic constitutional standards. This is true not only in the case you cited of arms to Israel, but all of these tariff measures are, again, in my view, a constitutional violation because Congress has the sole constitutional authority and responsibility to levy taxes. Tariffs are a tax. So how is it that one person is deciding on these tariffs? Well, this is an emergency. What's the emergency? Fentanyl. Because of fentanyl, we're putting out tariffs all over the world. That's the claim. Is this how our system of government now operates, that it's one person rule? I'm not talking about the substantive choice of these tariffs. I'm talking about the fact that the power to levy taxes is rightly a power that is granted to the legislative branch. That is a legal tradition of the British and American world that goes back many centuries. We actually have abandoned that. In the case you cited, in the tariffs that were imposed yesterday, and in the functioning of our government in general. We are in one-person rule. I don't like it. I'm not talking about any one person. I'm talking about the fact that our form of government has collapsed. Even though the structures are there, the form of government has collapsed. And what's shocking is there are no voices in Congress saying, oh, but tariffs, that's our responsibility. Arming other countries, well, that's an appropriation. That's our responsibility. You know, they're a little bit like the Senate in the Roman Empire after the end of the Roman Republic. The senators still wore their togas. They had no power, but they loved their status, and they liked to flaunt their status. But they didn't do anything anymore because the decisions were now in the hands of the emperor. Well, is that what the United States has become? I find it very, very sad.
The emperor is going to appear before a joint session of Congress tonight, and they will applaud him, even as he slowly and inexorably, in some cases radically and demonstrably, takes power away from them. I do want to ask you about tariffs in a moment, but before we do, just to finish up on Israel, as we speak, the Arab League is meeting. Is something going to come from this? Is this a resistance, or are they as feckless as they've been in the past?
Yeah, you know, this is a story that goes back a century. The Arabs were largely under the domination of the Ottoman Empire until the end of World War I, and had also been picked apart by Britain and France as the two imperial powers of North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. Since 1921, essentially, so for a century, the Arabs have been manipulated by the Western world, first by Britain and France as the dominant imperial powers, and then after 1945 by the United States. The principle is an old Roman principle, the divide et impera, divide and conquer. The whole idea of U.S. policy has always been to prevent a unified Arab voice. The Arab League, which is the group of the Arab nations, and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, have repeatedly said in now more than 20 years, they want peace, they want normalization of relations with Israel, but on the basis of a Palestinian state living alongside the state of Israel. Everything in our mainstream media hides that call by the Arab world and by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. You will not read these things in the mainstream media. How the Arab world, and by the way, Iran, is a member of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, have been sending every possible peace dealer trying to reach the Biden administration, now the Trump administration, to say we want peace, but on the basis of international law, justice for the Palestinians, and not this kind of ethnic cleansing and slaughter that the Israeli extremists want. But the idea of the U.S., though very successfully, is that we'll pick this apart. Let's try to get the Saudis on the side, or the Emirates, or Qatar, or others, rather than having the united voice of the Arab world. When you ask me what will happen, I truly hope, that the Arab world speaks with a unified, dignified, firm, clear voice. It has the overwhelming
Arius, what's going on? Arius.
Side effect. 95% of humanity.
Not really, just been focusing on.
Want the two-state solution. 95%.
Just been focusing on some things that I got to get done, and the things that's going on in the background with me right now, I have to consolidate all my remaining time and effort into it, because it's just based on what was happening then and what I foresee in the immediate future. if I don't buckle down and take care of it, no one's gonna come to my aid when I need it, and I just can't put myself in that position where I have to depend on people coming to my aid. It's not gonna work. Everybody has their own problems to deal with, so I just pretty much just cut myself from everything that's not gonna focus on trying to help me, and just focus on helping me. When I drown or die, everyone's life will continue.
But the United States pushes, the Israel lobby pushes, Netanyahu manipulates. And because of our political institutions at this point, Donald Trump will have a very big effect on this. If he listens to what the Arab countries are saying, Donald Trump can make peace for the first time in a century in the Middle East based on basic justice, that there's a Palestinian state. That's, I hope, what the Arab countries continue to make clear.
I know you're traveling and have more important things to do than watching the Oscars, but there was a very touching moment the other night in which an Academy Award for the Best Documentary was given to a documentary made by a Palestinian and an Israeli. And these two gentlemen gave a very, very touching speech. Each of them, Chris, has cut it down to its core. I'd like you to listen to it because this is what you have been saying in all the years that I have followed your work and been privileged to work with you. Chris?
The Oscar goes to no other land. The academic award is such a big honor for the four of us, and everybody supported us for this documentary. About 2 months ago, I became a father, and I hope to my daughter that she will not have to live the same life I'm living now, always feeling, always feeling sudden violence, home demolitions, and forest spirit displacement that my community in Sabriapa is living and facing every day under Israeli occupation. No other land will reflect the harsh reality that we have been enduring for decades and still resist, as we call on the world to take serious actions to stop the injustice and to stop the ethnic cleansing of Palestinian people. We made this film, Palestinians and Israelis, because together our voices are stronger. We see each other. The atrocious destruction of Gaza and its people which must end. Israeli hostages brutally taken in the crime of October 7th, which must be freed. When I look at Basel, it seems like rather that we are unequal. We live in a regime where I am free under civilian law, and Basel is under military laws that destroy the life that we cannot control. There is a different path, a political solution without ethnic supremacy, with national rights for both of our people. And I have to say, as I'm here, the foreign policy in this country is helping to block potential purge. Thank you.
It's not too late. There is another way. I work at the United Nations, as listeners know, and I speak with the UN permanent representatives, that is, ambassadors to the UN from all over the world. There is an overwhelming consensus in the world, overwhelming consensus, that there should be a Palestinian state living alongside the state of Israel. There are extremists on both sides of this Palestinian-Israel divide, but they are not the majority at all, and they manipulate. Netanyahu is a demagogue and a man of violence. His colleagues in the Israeli cabinet, people like Smotrich and Ben Gvir, are zealots who would mass murder the Arab population, who would ethnically cleanse the Arab population. This is not subtle. It's not hidden from view. It's in our sight every single day. Now, at the United Nations, essentially every country in the world, except for Israel, with its extremist government, and the United States as Israel's so far unconditional backer, support the two-state solution. It's not literally every state, because when the U.S. votes, countries like Micronesia, by treaty, vote with the U.S., Nauru, Palau, Paraguay, a few tiny countries vote with the U.S., but 95% of the world population votes for two states. And this two-state solution for peace has been endorsed just in recent months by the G20, by the BRICS countries, by the Arab League, by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, by the UN General Assembly, and by the UN Security Council. But in the UN Security Council, there was a veto of the state of Palestine. That veto was the U.S. veto. This is what we just heard. The U.S. is the blockage to peace that the entire world, other than Israel's extremist government, wants. What Donald Trump can do and should do as President of the United States is to say, first, American foreign policy is American. It's not Israeli, it's American. Second, our interests are in peace, avoiding World War III, avoiding escalation of war, avoiding Netanyahu's provocations to have a war with Iran, avoiding mass bloodshed and war crimes in Gaza and the West Bank. Third, we are not going to be complicit in these war crimes. Just as President Trump has stopped the arming of Ukraine because of its extremist demands, so too the United States should stop the arming of Israel because of its extremist demands. That is, until there is the two-state solution. And the United States can make that happen, actually irrespective of Israel's opposition, because Israel doesn't have a veto on international law. So if the United States changes its sole vote in the UN Security Council, then Palestine will become the 194th member of the United Nations on the borders of the 4th of June, 1967. And on that basis, the entire Arab League countries and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation have committed to peace and to normalization of diplomatic relations with Israel. So what this gentleman, this great director, said is literally true. The United States is the sole blockage of peace in the Middle East now. Israel, of course, doesn't want it, but the United States is the one that blocks the peace in practice.
What will happen if Donald Trump announces tonight or begins the process for the U.S. withdrawal from NATO? What becomes of NATO, Professor Sachs?
Well, the Europeans are recognizing, which they should have recognized a long time ago, that they should defend Europe. They can defend Europe. Their interests and American interests coincide in some ways and differ in other ways. Europe followed the U.S. into this terrible U.S.-Ukraine project, which was a project to expand NATO, and it was a U.S. project which Europeans were reluctant participants, but never expressed in public their opposition that they expressed to me repeatedly in private. Well, now they've seen that this isn't working. Europe doesn't carry its weight in global politics. I don't want a united Europe to make war with Russia. This is absurd. I want a united Europe that defends itself and that operates with diplomacy with Russia for the collective and indivisible security of Eurasia and Europe. And this is possible. So I don't know what Donald Trump would say about NATO, but arguably NATO could have been ended in 1991 when the Soviet Union ended, because because NATO was established in the late 1940s in order to defend against the potential invasion of a country that doesn't exist anymore. And Europe and Russia have all the grounds for peaceful coexistence, and they will be coexisting on the map for centuries to come if we don't blow ourselves up. And so Europe, in any event, needs to move to a European security arrangement. There are enough shocks in the world day by day right now that I personally want us to focus our attention on not more destabilization, but on ending these wars, because this is the first practicality that we face and the most urgent task that we face.
What are the effects of tariffs, Professor Sachs?
Well, tariffs essentially isolate the economy putting out the tariffs from the benefits of trade with the rest of the world. So tariffs are a tax on imports, and the United States is raising its taxes on imports. Other countries, China just now has retaliated on the U.S. rise of tariffs by putting on tariffs against U.S. goods. So this is a diminishing of U.S. trade with the rest of the world. What economists like myself have taught and studied for my whole career, and I would say for the lessons that economists such as Adam Smith unveiled in 1776 in his book, The Wealth of Nations, is that trade is a win-win for the countries that are engaging in trade. Trade is not a win-lose proposition. Trade is a win-win proposition. Unfortunately, there's a basic point that Donald Trump refuses, I'm sorry to say. He thinks that when the U.S. runs a trade deficit with other countries, that's because other countries are doing something unfair to the U.S. in trade. But the truth is, what a trade deficit means is that you're spending more than you are producing. That's all it means. So it would be like you're maxing out on your credit card, buying from all these stores in your city, and then accusing those stores of mistreating you because you're running a trade deficit with those stores. This is the ironic situation right now, which is that yes, the U.S. has a large trade deficit. The reason is we consume a lot. One of the reasons we consume a lot is that our government runs an enormous deficit, nearly 7% of our national income. Because we're consuming a lot, it's like we're running down all our credit cards, and then we're blaming those who are selling to us as if they're doing something unfair to us. So there's a very basic mistake in analysis right now, unfortunately, that's having huge ramifications for the world, but it's unfortunately it's macroeconomics 101, which I taught for many, many years at Harvard and Columbia University, and it's just not understood properly in the senior reaches of the U.S.
By the way, I understand there's a new addition to the Columbia faculty alongside Victoria Newland and Hillary Clinton and Jeff Sachs, and that's Mike Pompeo.
Well, he's not the economics department at this.
I thought board were going to give a seminar or a joint teaching course. I couldn't resist.
Well, it's interesting. Anyway, diversity of opinions. There we are.
Professor Sachs, this has been a brilliant and gifted 30 minutes with you. I am deeply grateful. I know you're traveling. Thank you for your time.
Great to be with you.
Seeing you again next week.
We will. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Here's going on, EJ and
Truly brilliant and gifted.
and Jim. What's up?
What a pleasure to be able to pick his.
Oh, yeah, just chilling. Would it be too much to ask for? Let me pause that. Let me pause that. The tea kind of washed on everything. Just to let you guys know, the ending of Dragon Ball Daima sucks. That's why you don't hear me talking about Dragon Ball. It's just stupid. episodes 1 through 19 were all great, and then they got to episode 20, and they just episode 20 undid everything 1 through 19. It's crazy. Oh, really? 11 minutes? Let's hear.
Right, so the matters have just taken a distinct turn for the worse for Israel at the International Court of Justice. Oh dear, how sad. Never mind. Because when they thought matters might have swung in their favour following the resignation of ICJ President Nawaf Salam to take up the post of Prime Minister of Lebanon, as he has, ridding them of a judge at the ICJ from a nation they are, it has to be said, currently invading, who had a deciding vote at that, matters are now slammed fully back into reverse. You see, following Salam's departure, the Vice President of the ICJ took over as the head of the
Remember, don't forget to
one
put up
judge
the
on the
posts on
ICJ 15
Instagram.
person panel, you absolutely
The
living at
other one where you
once
have
in
the jacket on?
the avowedly pro-Israel
Not right
Christian
now.
Zionist from Uganda, Julia Sabatinda, who's filling in for Salam like previously. It was figured that she would see out the remainder of Salam's elected term as president up to 2027. But in a sign of what can be taken as something of a confident vote, not without good reason, an election was instead called to fill Salam's voted post as president for the remainder of his term instead. And she didn't win. The guy who has might just be Israel's worst nightmare. Right, so the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, the most powerful court on the planet, World Court, has elected Japanese Judge Ryuji Iwasawa as its new president, which is a development that could have profound implications for Israel's ongoing genocide case brought by South Africa against them, and none of it is good news for them. You see, Iwasawa's election comes at a critical juncture in international law. This case will define the ICJ in terms of the credibility they have like no other in modern times. It is easily one of the most contentious and high-profile cases in the world, in it and in the history of the ICJ at that. So the significance of Iwasawa's appointment, his background, and his stats on Israel's actions in Gaza and the West Bank, which was recently opined on, I think it doesn't work for him. We all need to know a little bit more about this guy, therefore, and why he's potentially bad news for Israel, particularly in light of critical statements he's issued regarding Israeli aggression in the Middle East as well. So who is this guy then, Dana? Well, Ryuji Iwasawa is the Japanese jurist on the ICJ. 70 years of age, he brings considerable experience and expertise to the ICJ presidency, and after Sabatinda, the revelations about her having come to light recently restores some sense of credibility for the ICJ. Iwasawa was elected to the court in 2018 with a CV bursting at the seams of a background in international law, human rights, and constitutional law. He served as a professor at the University of Tokyo. He had been a member of the United Nations Human Rights Committee, where he contributed to the interpretation and implementation of the International Covenant on the Civil and Political Rights. Therefore, all in all, we have here a civil...
Just one. One piece of bread.
Academic professional credentials are making a highly respected figure in the field of international business. However, it is Iwasawa's record on the ICJ that has drawn particular attention in the context of the ICJ's current caseload, most especially in the case of South Africa versus Israel. You see, Iwasawa is a vocal critic of Israel's policies in the occupied territories, particularly its discriminatory practices that we've seen in the West Bank. A quote from the Emirati-based news outlet The National News very much stands to show. The ICJ also declared last July that Israel's occupation of the West Bank is unlawful and today as rapidly as possible. In that case, Mr. Iwasawa wrote a separate opinion, saying the court should have gone further in criticising Israeli practices. The discriminatory aspect of the dual legal system used by Israel in the West Bank deserved more attention today. While settlers are subject to Israeli criminal law, Palestinians living in the West Bank are governed by military law and prosecuted in military courts. Differential treatment between Palestinians and settlers is also found in the national health insurance law, taxation law, election law, and in the enforcement of traffic law. The dual legal system introduced by Israel in the West Bank treats Palestinians and settlers differently. Mr. Iwasawa said the decision that Israel's actions were illegal relates to the entirety of the occupied Palestinian territory, including Gaza. Statements such as that suggest Iwasawa has a very strong commitment to upholding international law and human rights. This has led many to view his election as a potential turning point in the ICJ's handling of the genocide case against Israel. That case, of course, is very much ongoing. Brought by South Africa against Israel at the ICJ, accuses the latter of committing genocide in Gaza. The charges sparked intense debate with various nations coming out on one side or another. South Africa's application alleges that Israel's military operations in Gaza, including the targeting of civilians and the destruction of infrastructure, constitute acts of genocide under the Genocide Convention, a case that the ICJ have accepted as being plausibly demonstrated as well. And in light of that, has drawn widespread attention with human rights organisations and international observers closely monitoring the proceedings. Israel has, of course...
All right, you talk too much. And it doesn't even make sense what you're talking about. Mearsheimer. Let's go. What happened? Wow, that's crazy. You would ask someone else on a live stream with Triforcing. Sorry, he was playing Tetris. Bro, I read the chat. The same question you asked me, you could have just asked me. I would have answered your question when I read the chat. There's nothing going on with me and CND. Wait, you said what happened between Triforcing? Yeah, there's not going on with me and CND. I don't know why you thought there was something going on.
Hi everyone, Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, March 4th, 2025. Professor John Mearsheimer joined us. Professor Mearsheimer, always a pleasure. I'd like to spend a little bit of time with you on the latest in Israel and Gaza, and some time with you as well on Ukraine and Russia. On Sunday evening, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu...
What? I didn't put that down?
The cusp of Ramadan, that he had decided to deny water, food, and medical supplies to the people of Gaza. Apparently, shortly thereafter, he withdrew President Trump's emissary, told him to dial it back. Where today, Prime Minister Netanyahu announced that not only is he going to deny food, water, medical supplies, but from electricity. I guess he thinks he can get away with this. He always gets his way. And in fact, whenever he's in trouble in Israel, he flies to the United States, meets the president or talks before Congress or does both. And he props up his standing in Israel, and he lives to fight another day. So, in terms of Netanyahu dealing with the United States, he is a win-win situation. And it's the answer to my question, the lobby. Why is Donald Trump, who is a man of peace and willing to frustrate the entire foreign policy establishment on Russia and Ukraine, simply going along, even doing more than Joe Biden, about which more in a moment, on Israel and Gaza? It's the wrong thing. I mean, the idea that the United States has a special relationship with Israel that has no parallel in recorded history tells you something that something extraordinary is going on here. This is an unbelievable relationship. Israel is a country that is effectively a strategic albatross around their neck. And it is in the process of committing genocide in Gaza. Yet we support it unconditionally. The United States is a liberal democracy. For liberal democracy, supporting a state that behaves like this is truly remarkable. And again, we're not just supporting Israel, we give Israel unconditional support. And the question I want to ask myself is, why is this the case? And the answer is clear. It's the Israel lobby. They basically have so much power in the United States that they get their way almost every time. So, yesterday, Secretary of State Rubio, in my opinion, committed perjury when he certified under oath to the Congress that Israel was in a state of emergency and required the immediate delivery of $4 billion worth of military gear, so immediate that there wasn't time to bring it to the Congress for the ordinary appropriations. There's a statute that allows the Secretary of State to do that. And Tony Blinken did that. I accused him of perjury, and I accuse false swearing. I accuse the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, of the same thing. What emergency? Is it a political emergency? What conceivable emergency is there that they don't have time to go to the Congress, which they know will give them whatever they ask for? At least emergency of Israel. This kind of thing just happens all the time. And I put it in a slightly different way. I think the dishonesty in our mainstream discourse
Killed myself.
of Israel is just off the charts. It's really hard to believe. The discourse that we engage in newspapers like the New York Times and especially the Washington Post and Wall Street Journal, and the discourse that our politicians are involved in about Israel is almost laughable when you actually look at the facts and then compare the facts to what's being said. But this has been true for a long time, and there's no reason to think it's going to change. So not only can Israel commit genocide and receive financial aid from the United States, in violation of two federal statutes. Not only can Israel have an atomic weapon without authority of the United Nations in violation of a treaty as well as a federal statute, Israel can benefit from secretaries of state lying about the immediacy of its need for all this gear and military equipment. All right, I get it. Is there an organized resistance to Israel in the Middle East?
No. I mean, there's no question that there are lots of countries in the Middle East that are deeply dissatisfied with what Israel is doing. But the Arab states have never organized in any meaningful way to stand up to Israel. And in a number of cases, they've thrown the Palestinians under the bus. To the extent that there is resistance, it involves Iran, it involves Hezbollah, and now it involves the Houthis. That is the real resistance here. With that, it's had some effect, but not much effect in terms of stopping genocide.
What about Turkey and Egypt? Colonel McGovern seems to feel that both are under tremendous leadership of both are under tremendous pressure from their own people to do something militarily, particularly President/General, I don't know if it's still a general or not, al-Sisi in Egypt. And Colonel McGovern, who's a former tank commander, says the Egyptians are amassing huge numbers of tanks in the Sinai. Does that tell you?
But I think there's no question that in countries like Egypt and Jordan, also in Turkey, but even in Turkey, there's tremendous pressure from down below on the leadership in those countries to do something about the genocide in Gaza. But the question you have to ask yourself is, do those countries have the military wherewithal to challenge Israel? And I think if you're talking about an armored battle involving Israeli tanks and aircraft up against Egyptian tanks and aircraft, that the Israelis would win easily, as they did in 1956, 1967, and 1973. Therefore, I find it hard to believe that the Egyptians would pick a fight with the Israelis. I don't think the Jordanians would under any circumstances. And I find it hard to believe that the Turks would either. The fact is that the Israelis pretty much have a free hand. And you want to remember that backing them up at every turn is the United States of America. So if they pick a fight with any one of those countries, or any combination of those countries, then they get into trouble. The United States.
Hey, chicken dogs up.
Do you think maybe that they're fucking on the Oval Office on the Friday between the president and his vice president, and the President Zelensky might have sent a message to Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I'm sure that Netanyahu is fully confident that he can manipulate the Trump administration in all sorts of ways and prevail over them. There may be some cases where there are domestic political forces inside of Israel that combine with some pressure on the United States, get Israel to do what it doesn't want to do. I think this explains why Israel agreed to the ceasefire with the Palestinians that took place on January 19th of this year. You want to remember that Steve
Come on.
over there,
I got him anyway. I'll be right back.
President Trump wanted a ceasefire by the time he was inaugurated, which of course was on January 20th. But the only reason Witkoff was successful was because the IDF, the Israeli military, desperately wanted a ceasefire, as did some other forces in Israel, and they were putting pressure on Netanyahu. So there you had the combination of pressure from President-elect Trump at the time and from down below in Israeli society was Netanyahu to accept the ceasefire.
Why does the donor class still have a hold on Donald Trump? He can't run for re-election. He doesn't need women.
The fact is that he has a broad agenda, and he has basically 4 years left as president. He has to worry about midterm elections, and he doesn't want to challenge the lobby this early in his presidency because it will just lead to one headache after another. It's incredibly powerful. If they put their gun sights on Trump, it will cause him enormous trouble moving forward, and he has enough other problems without having to pick a fight with the lobby. So they'll just go along with Israel.
Does Ukrainian President Zelensky have a hostility to peace? Does he really, in your view, think he can defeat the Russians, or is he afraid for his own tenure in office or tenure on this planet as a living being if he were to agree to some sort of a negotiated standstill?
Well, it's not going to be a negotiated standstill because that equals a ceasefire. The Russians have made it unequivocally clear that there's not going to be a ceasefire. The question is, will Zelensky agree to the peace terms that the United States is now pushing forward with the Russians? And he does not, under any circumstances, want to accept those terms because he would, in effect, be conceding what it is as being Ukrainian territory to Russia. He would have to accept Russian annexation of those 4 oblasts in the east and Crimea, and he would have to accept that Ukraine would be demilitarized and at the same time it would be a neutral state. He can't accept that. Not only
but it's inevitably coming. There's no way around it.
There's no question about that. But he just refuses to accept it, and it will probably be the case that somebody else has to accept it, that he won't accept it. I mean, maybe he will accept it, but it is what's coming. I mean, look, the United States, the West Europeans, East Europeans, and Ukraine, all 4 of those actors together could not defeat the Russians on the battlefield. The Russians are winning up against those 4 actors. Now you're talking about taking the most important actor out of the equation besides the Ukrainians themselves, and that's the United States. You really think that the Europeans plus the Ukrainians can stand up to the Russian steamroller if they couldn't with the Americans in the mix? And the answer is no. So he's destined to lose, as you say. And you would think under those circumstances it would make sense to accept the peace deal that Trump is trying to work out. But no Ukrainian that I see at this point in time in a leadership position is likely to accept those terms.
But why do you think the heads of most of the European countries, not in the EU, not Italy, not Hungary, met in London and endorsed this silliness out of the mouth of Prime Minister Starmer? We're going to make a $2 billion loan it's going to be repaid by the interest on the Russian money that's frozen in European banks. Oh, and we're going to put some British boots on the ground and planes in the air. I mean, this is absurd. But yet they said it with a straight face, and all of them went along with it, except for the ones that weren't there.
It is absurd. I think there were choices. I mean, the deal was that we get a ceasefire, and then after a good month, we'll put British and French peacekeepers into Ukraine, and peacekeepers from other countries that are part of this coalition of the willing. This is crazy. The Russians have said, number one, there will be no ceasefire, and number two, they've made it unequivocally clear that British and French troops, whether you call them peacekeepers or not, located in Ukraine is categorically unacceptable, and they'll shoot at them if the British and French put those troops in there. So this is a non-starter. It's just not going to go anywhere.
What is motivating the European leadership? Do they go to bed at night fearing an invasion from Vladimir Putin?
No, I don't think they fear that at this point. I think they're just so deeply committed to the Ukraine war that they can't bring themselves to abandon Ukraine. We want to remember that the Republican establishment and Democratic establishment here in the United States are profoundly committed to Ukraine. And those two establishments would not do what Donald Trump is doing, right, if they were in charge. Trump is an anomaly. He doesn't represent the Republican Party. Certainly doesn't represent the Democratic Party's view on Ukraine. So Trump has come into the White House, right, and his hands are clean on this whole matter of starting this war and keeping it going. And he's decided, as the new kid in town, that he's going to put an end to the war. And of course, the Republican establishment behind closed doors is deeply concerned about this. The Democrats are deeply concerned. And the Europeans are in the same boat. They all bear responsibility for this war. And they don't want to end it because they would then have a disaster next to their name. Trump doesn't have that problem. He says, quite correctly, I didn't start this war. If I had been in charge, we wouldn't have the war. I believe that. So he's coming now. He wants to put an end to the war. But he's really one of the few actors in the system who wants to end the war.
Isn't it amazing how people have changed their minds just because there's a new president in town? Here's one of the least reputable people in the Senate, but he's expressing two different views. Here is Senator Lindsey Graham, then and now, cut number 8.
I want to tell you and your people, you're the ally I've been hoping for all my life. Not one American has died defending Ukraine. You've taken our weapons and you've kicked their ass. Now I'm very proud to have you as our ally. So, we got Tate, complete, utter disaster. What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and I don't know if we can ever do this with Zelensky again. He either needs to resign and send somebody over that we can do business with, or he needs to change.
A lot of people have flip-flopped in deference to the president. I don't necessarily hold, I don't think you would either Senator Graham out as a paradigm. He's a bit of a goofball, but he does manifest this remarkable switch. I mean, we'll learn tonight when the president addresses Congress how they react, but I think they're going to applaud him aggressively, even the Democrats, over his strident 180-degree turning a battleship around.
That man did a ballerina dance.
I think the commentary on Republicans and Democrats meeting that took place last Friday. Very and this is reflected in Lindsey Graham's second set of comments there. If we're going to the Democrats, almost all the Democrats that I see or I've heard from have been criticizing Trump, and I would imagine that divide would remain in place. for the foreseeable future. But Trump is in control of the Republican Party. It's quite amazing. And he is determined, number one, to end the Ukraine war. He's determined, number two, to improve relations with Russia. And he's going to go ahead with it regardless of what the Democrats say, and even regardless of what some Republicans might say. And certainly regardless of what the Europeans say.
Here's the smartest foreign diplomat in the world saying, oh, the U.S. wants peace, Europe wants war. Cut number 13.
After Joe Biden, only people that come to power were guided by common sense. They say outright that they want to end all wars. They want peace. It demands a continuation of war. Europe.
You could ask him anything. What would you ask him?
Ask Lavrov?
Yes.
Not sure what I'd expect. I think it's very clear what Lavrov's views are on all of these issues. I have no need to ask him any questions. I just hope that he and Marco Rubio or Steve Witkoff, whoever he works with, are able to work out a deal that is as favorable to the Ukrainians as possible. And I think, as I've said before, the Ukrainians are going to get a bad deal no matter what. I just like to see them get the best deal possible. Hopefully, Lavrov and Putin will be able to work out a deal with Witkoff, Rubio, and Trump that works to the Ukrainians' advantage, at least to some extent.
But this is going to be a deal made between Russia and the United States. It's not going to, Zelensky's not going to be at the negotiating table.
No, I don't think Zelensky will be at the negotiating table with the Europeans. I think that Trump and the Russians will work out a deal. And then the question is, will Ukraine accept that deal, and will the British accept that deal? I mean, we're in this bizarre situation where Donald Trump wants peace, and he wants to improve relations with the Russians, and wants to help create a security architecture in Europe so everybody can prosper and we don't have any more war. This is Trump's goal. Anyway, no.
That's not which he had the same goal in the Middle East. That's not what we think.
Yeah, he doesn't. We know what. But the point is, we know what he wants to do in Europe. He's not a warmonger.
Right.
He's responsible in this case.
Yeah, if you were to say, or if I were to say to Sergei Lavrov, why do you think the Americans hate the Russians? How do you think it is?
Well, I think people probably think about some of the same factors that we think too. Number one, the fact that the Russians stood up to the Americans, first in Georgia in 2008, and second over Ukraine. Second, he understands very well that we blame, many Americans blame Russia for the fact that Trump won in 2016 and that Hillary Clinton lost. And I think he also understands that there is an ideological disagreement between Russia on one side and the United States on the other side, at least as it applies to the Democratic Party, and that has to do with the whole issue of LGBTQ. They're just fundamental differences on those sorts of issues. So I think he went for the same issues we did.
I can remember as a child, in grade school, we taught to demonize Nikita Khrushchev. I don't know if you remember those days. We're about the same age. It was like you were supposed to hate Khrushchev.
Absolutely. I mean, the difference between then and now was that you had a wicked ideological dimension to the competition. It was communism versus liberal democracy. It was communism versus capitalism. And they were seeing the communists as the font of all evil. And of course, Khrushchev was, in the 1950s, the head of the Soviet Union. He was the arch villain. And we were brought up to believe that we should loathe him, if not hate him. And you don't have exactly that situation today. The Soviet Union is not, Russia is not a communist state. But you do have an ideological dimension to this conflict. Some of it has to do with the fact that Putin is seen as a soft autocrat, and we are seen as bigger Democrats. And some of it has to do with social issues like LGBTQ, and whether or not the United States is a Christian nation or Russia is a Christian nation. These issues matter through the hostility between the two sides. And I think what Trump is interested in doing is ameliorating these ideological tensions as much as possible and establishing good relations between the United States and Russia.
Professor Mearsheimer, just like all of our conversations, scintillating, challenging, and informative. Thank you very much for your time, my dear friend. Thank you for accommodating my schedule this week, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
For sure. I look forward
Sasha,
to
come here for a second.
Thank you. All the best.
Come here for a second.
That's the thought town.
Did you find out who burnt the pot? What question? Hello, just came in, right? There's a guy. They come in, how long do they need to come in? So that it's not coming.
A lack of international action to counter a new round of Israeli siege on Gaza raises questions and concerns. Is the use of starvation as a weapon of war being normalized? And is the US still committed to the ceasefire deal that helped broker? This is Inside Story.
Yeah, who, John? Alright, good. I'm attacking.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zaidan. On Sunday, Israel once again cut off much needed food, medicine and fuel into Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government has been clear. The move is meant to pressure Hamas into accepting a new set of ceasefire terms. These terms, though, conflict with the ceasefire deal Israel agreed to in January. Hamas is calling the move a violation by Israel of that deal. But despite Israel's clear intent to use starvation as leverage, the global response has largely been muted. While Arab countries have condemned the blockade, the US and Europe do not appear willing to hold Israel to the terms of the original agreement. So, can Israel ever be held to account? And if so, how? We'll put back to our guests in a moment. But first, this report from Fukuyama Khan.
At this food distribution point in southern Gaza, rations are already meager. Palestinians here use what little they can to prepare meals to break their fast during Ramadan. They had hoped to mark the fasting month in peace, given the ceasefire. But only days into celebrations, Israel announced it would block aid and supplies from entering Gaza once again.
What is this decision? It is an execution. What more do they want to do to us? When they prevent everything from people, what is left? They destroyed their homes and devastated them. They also prevent food and drink from reaching them. Who would accept this?
Israel is attempting to pressure Hamas, changing the terms of the ceasefire both sides agreed back in January. Hamas says that's unacceptable.
We condemn the cheap blackmail practiced by Netanyahu and his extremist government against our people by using humanitarian aid as a bargaining chip in the negotiations.
The first 42-day phase of the deal expired on Saturday. That saw 33 Israeli captives and 1,900 Palestinian prisoners released. But rather than enter phase 2, Israel is backing a US proposal to extend the first phase in exchange for half the remaining 59 captives. That would essentially allow Israel to avoid negotiating its complete withdrawal from Gaza, its troops rebuilding, and its future governance. Hamas is calling on the international community to pressure Israel into starting phase 2 discussions as agreed. But the muted global response so far doesn't appear to have softened Israel's position.
If Hamas doesn't release the hostages soon, the gates of Gaza will close and the gates of hell will open.
U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is traveling to the region to prevent the ceasefire from collapsing altogether. But President Donald Trump also telling Netanyahu to do whatever he wants with the deal, Israel appears to have free rein to cut off supplies into Gaza.
The truth is that we're in a real famine. This is not a lie. We could not find anything to eat. We would not find anything to eat for a week. Because of this, we wonder if famine could return again. The biggest surprise is that we're in the 21st century and the world allows this famine.
Palestinians in Gaza are still facing Israeli attacks, and once again starvation, while they wait for the world to do something. Bertie Carr, Al Jazeera, Inside Story.
Well, before we go to our guests, let's talk to Asim Mushteha. He's the Gaza Response League at Oxfam. Joins us from Gaza. Good to have you with us, sir. So first of all, just to be very clear, are we now in a situation where Israel has stopped absolutely all aid, whether we're talking any items of food, water, clothing, fuel, getting into Gaza right now?
Yes, unfortunately, right now we don't have any trucks entering Gaza, including all the humanitarian items and the trucks that I agreed after the ceasefire. Since 3 days, we didn't receive any trucks in Gaza, including fuel, including all items.
And we're talking about, of course, a population of more than 2 million people. How is that impacting their plight?
Yeah. The impact is huge. Yeah, since the day one of announcing taking such decision about the closing of all borders, the items or the food start to be disappeared from the market, and the prices start to be increased. We are afraid that after maximum a week from this closure, we will face a new challenge. We will face people will not be able to have access to food or basic items. As a part of the siege or the closure of these two borders, also Israel cut the only electricity line that provide seawater desalination plants with electricity. This seawater desalination plant serves more than 400,000 individuals in the middle area. Also, this will impact their access to drinking water and to support their need, their humanitarian.
And I imagine you probably, as an aid agency, you ask Israeli authorities and officials to let you bring aid in. I'm wondering, what kind of response do you get? What do Israeli officials tell aid agencies about why they're doing this to a civilian population, and how long they'll go on with an absolute shutdown of any supplies for the civilian population?
Yeah. Our work, we are a humanitarian worker, and our aim is to support the need of people who are in need. And we are currently focusing on to support the returnees who return back from south to the north. And we are doing our best together with different stakeholders and different NGOs and UN agencies to support releasing or opening such border and release the blockade on people and to support the humanitarian. This is what we are doing.
All right, we'll see Mushteha there from Oxfam joining us from Gaza. Thank you very much, and we do hope
Thank you very much
for all the innocent people there.
Inshallah.
Well, let's bring in our guest now. We have joining us from Tel Aviv, Akiva Eldar, political analyst and contributor to Haaretz, and author of Lords of the Land, The War for Israel's Settlements in the Occupied Territories, 1967 to 2007. In Amman, Jordan, Tahani Mustafa, a senior analyst on Palestine at the International Crisis Group. And in New York, Adam Huck, professor of law and a judge, John O'Neill, scholar at Rutgers Law School. Warm welcome to you all. Let me start with Tahani. You know, it's been several days now, Tahani, since Israel announced it was simply cutting off all supplies all supplies of all basics of life in Gaza. We haven't seen countries which regard themselves as the upholders of human rights in the world take any strong action, any countermeasures to that right now, right?
Well, that's right. I think Israel has certainly successfully pushed the limits as to what merits outrage since the start of this war on Gaza. But worse yet, it's not just that these countries have been completely silent. The first day of the announcement of the weaponization of aid or cutting off aid to Gaza to pressure Hamas into accepting an initiative that was completely undisclosed to Hamas to begin with in terms of extending the first phase. We had seen the EU actively condemn Hamas, which was incredibly shocking considering by all definitions, Hamas is not the one that's starving and committing a war crime here. It's not the one starving 2 million Gazans right now. And so to not just see that silence from the international community, but more importantly to actually start to see that condemnation falling on Hamas instead of the actual party committing a war crime, has really revealed the double standard that I think many have been trying to really highlight over the last 16 months in terms of not just the way that the international community have largely remained silent, the fact that international organizations that should have been a deterrent for the kinds of actions we've seen over the last 16 months, not to mention the self-interest of regional states. Even today with the Arab League summit going on, this really isn't about necessarily what they can do to better the situation for Gazans or Palestinians, but more what they can do for their own domestic.
1 second, guys.
Security.
I'm looking at some stupidness. Oh man, let me unmute this because I want to watch this foolishness. You know something? People are actually stupid. That is such a stupid prank. Anyway, just to give you guys context to the prank, these guys are watching a horror movie, and from the horror movie jumps out of the screen fake zombies, but it scares the viewers so big time that they just go into a fear of shock. One guy goes and he hides behind a lamp. Like that would stop the actual oh man, yo. Oh, let me hear this.
Kyrie Irving leads the league in minutes since the league. When you traded Luka Doncic, a team that the position it had the most depth that was big, with very little creator, you have to create everything. And so the team couldn't sustain any minutes without him, so he had to play all these minutes. I don't know if that's why he got hurt. I'm though always of a big believer that the more minutes you play, the more likely it is you'll get hurt, especially an aging player who's dealt with injuries, dealt with knee stuff. And now the verdict is now in. It is a calamity of historic proportions, this trade. What was done to the Mavs fan base for no reason whatsoever 30 days ago is the likes of which franchises often never recover from. The Mavs fans went to bed on January 31st saying, all right, our window is probably the next 10 to 12 years is our window. And, with Kyrie's playing well, and Luke is coming back, and they wake up 30 days later, and they don't have their own draft pick, 27, 28, 29, or 30. Shams an hour ago said Anthony Davis might shut it down. Kyrie is likely not playing again until this time in 2026 at the earliest. And the window's closed. Your own GM said it was 3 to 4 years. Year 1 is done. Year 2 is probably done. And then you have lesser returns. You have an undersized player dealing with an injury who at that point is 34 years old, 35 years old. So listen, we're going to see, if AD does come back, it's just AD as a Pelican again. Just AD with an odd roster where he has to do everything. And so this is devastating for Kyrie and devastating for Mavs fans.
That's messed up what happened to Kyrie Irving, man. He tore an ACL, he's out for the year. $704. Yeah, probably gotta go. I'm gonna head over to the what the hell? I want to get ready to go. I want to go grab some ramen. All right, guys. Thanks for chilling out with me for the last 2.5 hours. I'm gonna go try to get some ramen before the supermarket close. I'll be back tomorrow-ish. If not tomorrow, definitely on Thursday, because Nala has a podcast with some guys. I'm gonna come on before she goes on. That sort of thing. So if anything, I'll see you guys then. I appreciate y'all coming and hanging out. Shout outs to the Joy-Con boys. That came through. Shout outs to COVID who stopped by as well. Really appreciate it. Shout outs to Reg, Kisan, Lumpyhead. And I think that's pretty much it. Everybody, and what this guy? Lewis. Yeah, thanks guys for dropping by. Appreciate it. Check on you guys later. Peace.